History loves its kings, warriors, and inventors. But in this video, we'll look at 5 of history's most cunning con artists and how they pulled it off. 1. Charles Ponzi. You know you've made it to the Con Man Hall of Fame when an entire scam carries your name. Charles Ponzi didn't just swindle in the 1920s, he branded the playbook. His pitch was irresistible. Hand him your savings, and in 3 months, he'd double it, guaranteed. But the secret weapon? International reply coupons. They were little vouchers you could buy in one country to prepay for postage in another. So basically, it's just stamps you could swap across borders. Because exchange rates weren't balanced, you could, in theory, buy them cheap in one place and redeem them for more expensive stamps elsewhere. On paper, it made sense. Exploit the difference, flip the coupons, pocket the margin. But here's the catch, there was no real flipping. Ponzi never bought enough coupons to make the scheme work at scale. Instead, he used the flood of money from new investors to pay off the old ones. Those early payouts made the whole thing look legit. Neighbors bragged, immigrants pooled savings, even bank clerks quit their jobs to chase the miracle. At his peak, Ponzi was pulling in $1 million a week, close to $500 million a year in today's money. Then the Boston Post dug into the numbers, regulators pounced, and the entire house of cards caved in. Ponzi was sent to prison, and investors lost homes, pensions, and of course, their future. Victor Lustig. In 1925, the Eiffel Tower wasn't the shining tourist magnet it is now. Back then, it was rusty, expensive to maintain, and widely seen as an eyesore. Newspapers complained the city could barely afford it. Lustig, reading those headlines, spotted his opening. He forged government stationery, gave himself the title of Deputy Director of Public Works, and staged a private meeting at a luxury hotel with scrap metal dealers. The story was slick. The government had quietly decided to dismantle the tower and sell it for scrap, but because the plan would outrage the public, the negotiations had to stay secret. That secrecy worked like bait. It made the deal feel exclusive, like insider access. The scrap dealers believed him. One bidder even slipped Lustig a fat bribe to secure the contract. Lustig pocketed everything and skipped off to Vienna. And the mark? He was too humiliated to admit he'd been conned. He kept his mouth shut. That shame was part of the design. If your victim won't speak up, you can walk away untouched. And Lustig knew it, because he came back to Paris later and tried the exact same scam again. This time, the police got suspicious, but Lustig slipped away before they could grab him. And the man's resume didn't end there. He even once tricked Al Capone, promising to double the gangster's money, pretended to fail, then returned the untouched cash as if he were being honest. Capone, impressed by his integrity, tipped him 10 grand. That's not just a con. That's a con wrapped inside another con. Notorious. In India, if someone pulls off an outrageously slick swindle, people don't just call them a fraud, they call them a Notorious. That's how deep this man's legend runs. Notorious was a master forger and actor. His favorite move was impersonation. He'd roll into town posing as a politician's aide or a high-ranking official, walk into a jewelry store, and place a huge order for watches, gold, whatever he wanted. He'd escort the shopkeeper to a bank in a chauffeured car, emerge with a perfectly forged cashier's check, and drive off like a man with nothing to hide. The check looked flawless. The car looked official. The buyer looked important. By the time the check bounced, Notorious was already a rumor on the next train. That was his template. Build trust with props, back it with paper that looked government, issued, and disappear before reality could catch up. He pushed the trick to absurd levels. He sold the Taj Mahal more than once. Yes, he actually convinced gullible foreigners that they were buying India's most famous monument. He even forged the signature of President Rajendra Prasad. Prison was never more than a temporary inconvenience. He escaped at least 8 times, once dressed as a guard, once carrying a suitcase of cash that turned out to be old newspapers. His convictions stacked up to 113 years, but he served maybe 20. Even his death is disputed. Some say 1996, others 2009. His lawyer swore one date, his brother swore another. Poetic, really. The ultimate con artist even conned history about his own ending. Frank Abagnale Jr. If you've seen Catch Me If You Can, you already know Frank Abagnale Jr., or at least, you know the Hollywood version. The real story is part fact, part performance, which is fitting for a man who built a career out of pretending. As a teenager in the 1960s, Abagnale figured out the oldest trick in banking. Checks were easy to forge, and banks weren't exactly quick to verify them. He printed thousands, each one just convincing enough, and cashed them across America and Europe. The paper floated through the system, and by the time anyone realized they were fake, Abagnale was already sipping champagne in another city. But here's what made him legendary: the costumes. He posed as a Pan Am pilot, strolling through airports with forged ID badges and the kind of confidence that makes people wave you through without question. He didn't just cash paychecks under the airline's name, he deadheaded on real flights for free, simply by wearing the uniform and talking the talk. And he didn't stop there. He bluffed his way into hospitals as a doctor, using medical jargon he'd skimmed from textbooks. He faked his way into a law office by passing the bar exam after a few weeks of study. Hotels, banks, airlines, he played them all with a mix of forged documents, sharp memory, and the kind of nerve most people only dream about. Eventually, the law caught up, and he served time in prison. After his release, Abagnale rebranded himself as a security consultant, teaching banks and businesses how to prevent fraud, the very kind of fraud he'd perfected. Today, some historians argue that parts of his story may be exaggerated, shaped more by Abagnale's talent for storytelling than cold fact. But maybe that's the greatest con of all, convincing the world that the myth of Frank Abagnale is just as real as the crimes he committed. So, who do you think is history's most cunning con artist? Drop it in the comment section. And if you enjoyed this video, please make sure to like and subscribe, and also click on the notification bell to get updates on when we drop new videos. See you next time.